10 ways to become more attractive based on science.
Blonde women got approached more, right?
What?
Women prefer the kind of stereotypical Dorito shape, right? The kind of, that triangle.
That's why women love Doritos. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to Luvbites by Dr. Tara podcast. I am here in the beautiful, sunny, not so sunny, London, filming the show Celebs Go Dating. So I figured I'll get together the coolest, most interesting experts in the field to chat with me on my podcast. So joining me today is Macken Murphy, I would say, the it guy for evolutionary scientists for Gen Z, right?
Maybe. I mean, there's not much competition because I don't know if there are very many, Gen Z evolutionary scientists.
Quite the internet famous, and also I would say a very research famous.
Oh, I don't know about research famous. My my social media and general science communication has definitely outpaced my research effort. I mean, I am an active researcher, and I certainly like the stuff I'm doing, but if I go to an academic conference, people don't recognize me for my research. Sometimes people come up to me and they're like, "Oh,
social media.
I like you." Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll have other academics come up to me and be like, "Oh, I listen to your podcast," or I've seen some of your TikToks, but not so much on the research front.
And your podcast, love your podcast, Species, where you talk a lot about human mating behavior.
Yeah, recently we've been doing a lot of evolutionary anthropology and things like that, but there's a very long back catalog of evolutionary biology in there as well.
But you love research and you love talking about research. And I think before we go into, 10 ways to become more attractive, which I think is a very important conversation, I do want to talk more about your credentials because, you're not some online guru, self-proclaimed person that we have so many nowadays, right? Talking about attractiveness and masculinity and this and that. And I mean, good for them, get their bag. But at the same time, you come from a very science-backed viewpoint. And that's what I really, really enjoy. And sometimes we debate, right? Sometimes we perhaps even disagree. But I just really love and respect what you do.
Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's talk about your, a little bit of your history. How did you get started studying evolutionary social science?
I always had... I won't say always, but when I got to university, I had a very strong interest in animals, right? And so I was interested in taking some biology courses.
In my field, that means different things. But
I had a strictly scientific interest in evolutionary biology and zoology and those topics. But I was doing a history degree, and so I didn't really get to read much about it. And I'd never really considered doing evolutionary biology, but on my own time I was reading quite a bit. And then a fellow student of mine, a really good friend, she basically came to me and was like, I think this was our freshman year, she was like, I just took my first evolutionary psychology course. You would love it, right? You should definitely try to get in there. And so I was like, well, I didn't really know much about the evolutionary human behavioral sciences, but it certainly sounded quite interesting. This was at Boston University. And so I started taking many evolutionary anthropology classes. And ultimately, I did a double major in biological anthropology. Mostly, you have to take various biology and physical anthropology courses. But my kind of track in terms of the courses I selected while doing evolutionary anthropology was mostly, mental and behavioral stuff. And then from there, I went on to do a cognitive and evolutionary anthropology degree, a master's at the University of Oxford nearby. And
that's why you're here. So you went to Oxford and now you're kind of chilling in Oxford for a little bit. Yeah,
I've spent most of my time over the last few years, living in Oxford, and spent I would say, half of the last year, let's say, in Melbourne, where I'm doing a PhD now in psychological sciences from an evolutionary perspective again. And then actually, it's kind of funny, this kind of a funny time to do an interview because it's about 8 days until I make the move. So I've been, packing and figuring things out. But I'll be moving to Melbourne, and I have no plans to come back to Oxford after that. Yeah. I graduated, like a year and a half ago. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in your PhD, are you specifically studying certain topics?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm studying beautification right now. So during my, I should have clarified.
Beautification.
Yeah. So during my undergrad, I was very interested in human violence, but I didn't do any research in that direction.
So like so tough to study that versus like
Yeah.
beautification.
Yeah.
Can
So
you tell us a little bit more what beautification is?
Yeah, so my research interests have gotten progressively less depressing. I was originally interested in human violence and warfare, male violence. I thought it was really interesting from an evolutionary perspective. And then I realized that a lot of that was just downstream of mating. And so I was like, oh, I should learn more about the mating stuff. And I became quite interested in the topic of infidelity. And so that's what I did my master's on. And we just published a big paper on that.
Congratulations.
Yeah, that was from
we
the
have
master's.
to have another episode about infidelity.
Yeah, and now my interest is more on, so the infidelity research then kind of naturally led into physical appearance and physical attractiveness stuff. Mainly because our results showed that was an important component.
It's huge.
Yeah.
Even though people like to say, like, oh no, like I don't care about physical attractiveness.
People really care.
They really do.
People really care.
They really do. Thank God there's a scientific person approving this comment, because I consistently say it's so vain to be like, oh, I care about physical attractiveness, but it's true.
Yeah.
And it's true for all humans. And we're not saying there is like a golden rule and everyone must look like this and you should get plastic surgery. Like that's not what we're saying here, but we're saying, let's be realistic. Like there are certain characteristics like physically that you can improve, that you can change, that it's like in your hands to enhance, I would say. So that's why I really want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, on the physical appearance thing, it's funny because if you ask people, in a survey what they want, physical attractiveness consistently comes up pretty low on the list, right? You'll hear about like honesty, kindness, mental stability, those kind of things.
Boring.
And then physical attractiveness, it's always there, but it's often quite low. And I think that it might be that people don't have great insight into what we want, right? It could be that we don't realize how much we care, but it could be social desirability bias, where it's like you're talking to someone on a survey and you're like, I want to sound like a deep person.
Yeah.
But on speed dating studies, in some vignette research, dating app research as well, it really does seem that certainly for short-term and initial interactions, physical appearance is, if not the most important thing, one of the most important things. And it seems to, and this is very consistent with kind of folk psychological understanding, it becomes progressively less important as, relationships get longer and more committed and more serious. But at least during the opening stanza of, figuring out whether you're going to enter a relationship with someone, that sort of thing, physical appearance is very important.
Yeah, so safe to say, physical appearance is an important factor in dating.
Yeah, for sure.
In flirting.
Yep.
In getting that girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's patently important.
Yeah. Of course, I care so much about dating someone who's kind and emotionally intelligent. That's very important. Communicative, expressive, things like that are very important. But at the same time, I don't want to discount like physical connection and physical attractiveness, because it's real and it's there. So let's talk about it.
Sure.
All right. So we're here with the expert. Might as well talk about 10 ways to become more attractive based on science. Number 1, how can a man become more attractive?
So the list is making me nervous. I'm like, do I have 10? I hope I have 10.
I have 10 questions.
Well, yeah, I think that I guess I want to start with kind of the caveat that you began with, which is that we don't want people to stress about this unduly. Obviously, people have body image disorders, and those are on the rise.
Right.
Looks matter, but they're not the only thing. No. And they're not in, a long-term committed context. They're probably not even the most important thing, right?
You're right, because there are a lot of like physically attractive, like hot people that when you start talking to them, you're just like, wow.
Yeah.
You are not interesting. Or
they get into a relationship quite easily, but they also get out of it just as easily because they, haven't worked on other things, or they have other shortcomings. And so, it's certainly not the case that, it's a big thing online to be like, oh, looks matter most, or it's the only thing. If you go for a walk, you can see that there are plenty of people who aren't particularly good looking, who have very happy marriages, who are, holding hands with somebody and having a good time. That said, it does matter, and improving it, in a mentally healthy and dignified way. I don't think there's any. I don't think that there's any issue with that.
Right.
So what can men do? Well, it's funny because I think women have a much. We'll get on to women, but I think that women have a much better sense of what's effective for
Yeah.
beautification, right? Men, however, often kind of miss things that they could be doing. I mean, obviously, getting your basic hygiene immaculate and things like that. Well, we won't even talk about that.
Wash your
But
face, brush
yeah,
your
yeah.
teeth, comb your hair.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But one place we could start is something that most young men already do, which is lift weights on a regular basis, right? There's plenty of research showing that women prefer muscular mates, that muscular mates have more attention from women, greater mating success. And women on self-report studies and in various methodologies consistently think that more muscular men are more attractive. And a lot of men already do that. But I think that some men maybe they don't attend to the right muscles, let's say. So I think that a lot of men, they hit the gym and they just want to hit biceps, right? But biceps, they don't really affect your silhouette very much. There's not a lot of research showing that they're, particularly important as a muscle. It's kind of like a muscle that you work for. It's kind of like muscle that you work for other men, right? To some extent.
They're, dude, look at me, dude.
Yeah, exactly. Because the only time that anyone can see your biceps really is if you do like a double bicep pose.
Right.
And, throw it out. I'm not going to do that, but too shy. But the muscles that would probably be better to work would be ones that enhance your silhouette, right? That give you a more masculinized body shape, because
Like
we have
what?
plenty of research showing that women prefer broad shoulders and narrow waists, right?
Yeah.
Broad chest, narrow hips, right? We're talking about the kind of stereotypical Dorito shape, right? The kind of that triangle.
That's why women love Doritos. But you're saying
maybe.
like shoulders and like pecs.
Yeah,
right?
I'm saying
like this
I'm saying
area.
that widening this area, pecs to an extent from a profile view would
Yeah.
exaggerate it, but I would say that the most important muscles to work if you're purely going for making your body more physically attractive to women would probably be the delts, right? So these muscles here, the kind of shoulder caps, because that's the only muscle that you can work to actually widen this distance.
Dudes listening, like signing up to a gym. A gym should really sponsor me. But okay, I can see that because even like when I was younger, like as a teenager, the girls get together and we talk about the swim guys.
Yeah, because swimmers,
swimmers, they have the best
swimmers have great
shoulders.
shoulders, and then they also, I'm glad that you mentioned swimmers, because swimmers also tend to have very impressive lats, right? The muscles under here, and those muscles enhance that V taper, let's call it, the kind of Dorito shape. They enhance that profile, they enhance that silhouette by widening at the top as you go out. So if you lift your arms up, then that creates, instead of kind of a flat body, it creates a more angular shape, and that's something that at least in research it seems women generally respond to.
I approve.
I guess another thing that's on a very related note is you can change so again, this is something that women do quite well. Women are very attentive, it seems, to, how does this clothing make my body look? Right. Men don't seem to really talk about that consciously. Like a woman might put something on and be like, oh, does this...
It's not flattering.
How does my butt look in this? That kind of thing. But men won't like put on a shirt and be like, okay, how do my shoulders look in this outfit? Right. Is this flattering? Right. Yeah. I've actually never heard a man ask like, is this flattering? You know what I mean? But it's something that...
They should, bro.
But it's something that would be very helpful because... I mean, just being realistic, it's like I know a lot of guys who, hit the gym very diligently.
Right.
And they have great physiques, but they don't actually go the next step to wear clothing that shows that off in a respectable way. So one thing would be, for most men, this is going to mean clothing that's looser around like the lower torso.
Okay.
To make the waist seem
looser
smaller.
Here.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Because if it's super tight, then you can see the actual, if it's kind of draped, then you won't necessarily see what's going on.
Right.
The only people who can really get away with like a super, cinched waist as a man are probably people who are quite slender anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone can wear whatever they want, but in terms of like maximizing your aesthetics. And then I would say that also, wearing clothing that conversely tends to hug the chest and shoulders area, right? Hug the arms. That can give the impression of a more filled out appearance, right? But again, it kind of it's
and the ladies love the filled out appearance.
Yeah, it's more of an art than a science, in the sense that it's like you have to actually put on clothing and be like, oh, does this, do I look nice in this? Do I look athletic? Do I have that? Women are very cognizant of that. Men not so much. Another hot topic, and this relates to clothing, would be that women do have a preference for taller than average men, right? It's not, you know,
What's
tallest.
an average height?
So the average height for men is about 5'9"
Okay.
in the UK and US. And then the average height that women most prefer seems to be that there's diminishing returns after about 6'1", right? I mean, it depends on the study methodology. I'm going off kind of dating app studies and
Right.
dating app data and
Oh, what about guys that are like 5'5"? Like
well, this is
short
kind of the thing
kings, you matter.
is that a little bit of height can go a long way. Like if you're 5'5", but you put on a nice pair of boots,
Yeah.
and you know, get some more volume on top of your hair, right, in terms of
Yeah.
style.
That's like women wearing push-up bras.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, okay.
Yeah, so men don't often don't really pay attention to the height of their shoes, but you
But
can
there are
easily
lots of like
sneak out.
shoes
Yeah,
with heels,
yeah,
like
like a lot of
boots,
sneakers naturally have a couple
sneakers,
inches.
yeah.
Some boots naturally have a few, and
There's
so it's like,
Converse that have like this much
yeah,
height.
and it doesn't look strange, and
No, it's cool.
yeah, it looks cool. And then if you're in a bar setting or on a first date, well, then you're a couple inches taller, and that can make a big difference. I mean, if
Yeah.
you're 5'9", you can go from 5'9" to almost 6 foot, right?
Yeah,
Pretty easily.
yeah, and sit up straight.
Yeah,
Sit up
posture can
straight.
help
I
as
feel
well.
like a lot of
Now I'm
guys
kind of
sit like
cognizant of
this.
Well, I'm doing that right now. I'm completely
Well, no,
slouching.
you're like relaxed.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of guys sit like this.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Posture could
just
add some
watching
height.
them at the bar. You
Yeah.
know, I love people watching. So whenever I'm like out and like nightlife,
you're
I'm
like, "Stop
always just
slouching."
like observing.
Yeah.
What's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
That's so interesting. What about, so we've been talking about like the body a lot
Yeah.
and also like clothing. What about facial features?
Yeah, that's the thing, is that there's not much that you can do to change your facial structure beyond surgery, and I wouldn't really recommend that. It can often, I don't want to name any names, but we all know of like very handsome celebrities who have
Yeah.
tried to take it too far and mess
Yeah.
around with plastic surgery. Then
Yeah.
it's you know, facial aesthetics are kind of difficult to get right. I'm not sure. I would never recommend, you know, going under the
What about
knife. Right?
facial hair?
Facial hair. So facial hair is a funny one. So I've read a lot of the literature on facial hair, and I've also spoken to Barnaby Dixon, who is one of the leading experts on this subject.
I love
And-
that there's a leading expert on facial hair.
Yeah. So there's different studies go different ways, but I would say that the overall picture is that clean shaven and beardedness generally don't do as well as heavy stubble. So if you're a man and you've got good facial hair genetics, right, you can grow thick, dark stubble.
Right.
That's probably the move for
Not
most
the
of you.
flimsy ones.
Yeah. But that's
I
the
would
thing.
rather you shave if you
Yeah.
have like 5
Yes.
hair.
So I'm glad you're saying that, because this is exactly the point that I want to make, which is that whether your facial hair decisions as a man, ultimately, if you're just trying to maximize your physical attractiveness, should probably be the result of a matrix of how good are my facial hair genetics, and then how good is my jawline, right? So it's
Period.
like, if you have really good facial hair genetics, heavy stubble probably is advisable. That's going to be what's most attractive to most women.
And that's the 5 o'clock. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
That's hot. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of Hollywood men actually have that.
But if you're like me and you can't do that, right? So I can grow, you know, a very patchy blonde beard, right? And so it's a decision of like, okay, should I would say that if your jaw is a weak point, then it's probably advisable to, you know, grow some cover up, so to say.
Yeah.
And there's even some research indicating that men with very masculine jawlines look better than men with less good jawlines when clean shaven, whereas men with, you know, lacking jawlines or less masculine jawlines tend to do better with a full beard. So what is this to say? It's just to say that your beard decision making, if you can't grow heavy stubble, which is probably optimal for most men, you should ask yourself, okay, how thick of a beard can I grow? Because maybe I can grow a nice one and it can be good cover up. And also, how good is my jaw? Like, how much do I want to show this off?
And what is a good jaw based on literature?
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
It's like the sharp one.
Yeah, I mean, it's in the facial aesthetics literature, it's generally accepted that a sharp jawline looks good.
Okay.
But I don't know of any evolutionary literature that's looked into this, because usually the evolutionary literature is interested in
mating,
in
right?
in
Like what
facial
kind of jaw
masculinity.
gives you more mates?
It's interested. They're generally interested in like androgenic features, so facial masculinity versus facial femininity. And I'm not sure whether a characteristically sharp jawline is necessarily masculine or feminine. I
Right.
would say the wide jaw is certainly masculine.
So someone like Timothy Chalamet
Yeah,
seems feminine,
yeah,
but has very sharp jaw.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking about.
Yeah.
So that's something that, I mean, it's not my specific area, so it's something that I'll revisit after the show and try to send you a text about. But it is funny. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Timothy Chalamet because a lot of men have this kind of folk psychological thought that the more masculine their face is, the more attractive they'll be. And there is some research indicating that slightly masculine faces are preferred by women, but there's also some research indicating that slightly feminine faces are preferred by women.
Right.
And the overall picture, I'd say, is that a moderate amount of, like a
Yeah.
middling amount.
Yeah.
You don't want to be too masculine, right? You don't want to
Right.
you don't want to look like, super scary,
Yeah.
like a brute. But you also don't want to look so feminized that you look female, right? It's somewhere in the middle there that seems to be optimum for attractiveness. For women, it's a little different though. The research on facial femininity and facial masculinity in women does seem to show that facial femininity is highly preferred. And we can
I
talk
bet.
about why, but I know you've got a lot of questions. So
Yeah. Yeah, we'll go into women in just a bit. I have a question regarding dangerous practices of facial augmentation amongst young men
yeah,
that we've seen on the internet, on the dark corner of the internet. Can
Yeah.
we talk about that a little bit?
yeah. I mean, it's funny. We're actually, I mean, I'm not able to speak about it, but we are doing some research in that direction right now.
Okay.
And yeah, it's very disturbing.
Yeah.
It's very disturbing. It's
So
I
the
I, I
case
don't know.
on the internet is
Yeah.
the one that like boys like change their face at
Yeah, they'll
home.
do at-home cosmetic surgery and then
Yeah.
also at-home cosmetic procedures, and
Like
that's
by
a very loose
themselves.
term. Yeah. And when I say cosmetic procedures, that's really the loosest sense of the word, because some of these boys are hitting themselves in the face with blunt objects
Right.
in an attempt to cause microfractures to their bones by the logic that it might regrow bigger.
Oh my God. Please
n-
don't do it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see how that wouldn't cause soft tissue damage, nerve damage, but even it could potentially cause things like CTE. I think it's a very silly thing to do, and it's also very unlikely to result in any positive
Yeah.
facial aesthetics changes.
Better hit the gym.
Yeah, better to hit the gym and then
This.
kind of yeah, I mean doing that's the
Buy
thing
a
is
better
that
shirt.
yeah, that's the thing is that beautification, it's interesting because I think that it's maybe in vogue to just say, "Oh, you shouldn't care about the way you look," that sort of thing. And I think that that's kind of too far in the other direction. I think there's a middle ground where it's like if you're hitting the gym a few times a week and you're a little more attentive to the clothes you're wearing and you're a bit pickier about your hair, right? That's probably going to result in you being a little more confident and girls liking you a little bit more and everything going well. But if you're at a point where you're, taking androgenic drugs, right, steroids, that sort of thing, or you're hitting yourself in the face with a hammer to try and change your facial structure, that's almost certainly way too far and not going to make your life better.
Right. And we just want you to be safe and we want people to,
And feel
be
good about
safe,
themselves.
be
Yeah.
happy, flourish.
Yeah.
Yep. So make sure that you listen through the whole episode because I have so many more questions overall for men, women, all genders, all sexual orientation about attractiveness. But just for now, I want to jump to what would be your advice on women becoming more attractive.
Women become it's funny. So I've got I grew up with sisters and they with all this stuff there. So my audience is mostly women, so I often get questions about like women's attractiveness, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And my sisters are always like, "Be careful, like don't make it sound like you're like saying,
Oh.
because I could get clipped and it looks like I'm saying this is how I think
Right.
women should look, right?
Right.
But
I will not clip you like that.
well, yeah. I think it's I think it's a fair question, and I think a lot of people would like to know. But again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier. I think a lot of the things that I would say, women would already
Hit the gym?
know, right? So like like when women hit the gym, they actually do tend to focus on, the gluteofemoral muscles, right? They upper leg, glutes, etc. Which
That's from squats, right?
yes, squats, hip thrusts, that sort of thing. They tend to focus on those muscles, and that makes sense from a strategic perspective if they're trying to enhance bodily attractiveness, because men are quite attentive to the waist to hip ratio when selecting mates.
Tell us more.
So that's waist to hip ratio. Men generally, and it varies across cultures and across ecologies, but in general, men are quite attentive when selecting a mate to the ratio of the waist to the hips, right? So wider hips and narrower waist is generally preferred, right? And this shows up in our media. It's very stereotypical.
Little waist, big butt.
Yeah, basically. But also wide hips, right?
Yeah.
And
because again, hips and butt's not the same.
Well,
like,
but
hips kind of here, right? And then the butt, that's where like people get like BBLs and stuff. That's
they
like
are
the
different.
back.
They are different, but in terms of the measurement of the waist to hip ratio, the waist is measured around the narrowest point, and the hips are measured around the widest point. And so if your butt is bigger, then you do get a smaller waist to hip ratio as a result of that. So it makes sense that women hit those muscles. So women are generally, focused on the muscle groups that actually do enhance their attractiveness, whereas men are doing bicep curls for each other, right? Whereas it with lat raises lateral raises would be better. But and then also women's fashion, again, like with men's fashion, I think that, and maybe it's just me not having the experience of like shopping as a woman, but I do feel that men's clothing isn't that keyed in to like what women find attractive, right? Whereas women's clothing actually does try to, like all the high-waisted stuff, that kind of thing, tends to cinch the waist and exaggerate the, the hips. A lot of women's clothing is actually quite tuned in to, and this goes back, even centuries. A lot of women's clothing does tend to exaggerate these ratios. So a lot of the advice that I would give is already, very, clearly,
like we know,
well known. Yeah, exactly. So, and some of the things that I would say, it's more about like why it works rather than what works. Like, for example, most women would know that they look better in heels, right? But it's an area of conversation as to what actually is happening there.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so it's quite counterintuitive, because like with men, taller is more attractive, and there have been historical periods where men have predominantly worn heels, right? And that makes total sense, because taller men are generally more attractive. Men don't really have a preference for taller women, right? It seems that men have a moderate preference for average height women, but not one that really matters. It's a small effect size. So the question of why do women wear heels as a beautification strategy is quite an interesting one. And some have argued that it's because it creates an arch in the lower back, right? It changes your posture. So when you wear heels, you have to stand in a different way. And so it alters your posture to cause a lower back arch. And we know from a few studies that men are attentive to a slight arch in the lower back, right? They find that attractive. And so heels could enhance attractiveness.
There's a study about women's lower back.
Yeah, there's actually a few, and it's funny. There's actually a debate, and I'm not joking. There's a debate in the literature as to why, because it's like, why would men like an arch in the lower back? And some have argued that it is downstream of lordosis behavior. Are you familiar with this term? So lordosis is, and maybe I'm mispronouncing it, because this is the first time I've had to say it out loud. It's one of those words that I've read a million times before. But it's in mammals when they arch their back during mating, right? And so it could be that there's some attentiveness to the lower back arch, but it could also be,
That's
and
true.
this is a
Because
counter-argument,
when you hit it from the back,
there's more.
The back is arched.
Yeah, right. And then on the other end, there's a question of whether it could be that there's a degree of back arch that is optimum for pregnancy, right? So for reproductive health. And so it could be that there's, a degree of natural arch that is optimum for reproductive health, and men are attentive to this, and heels force you to be in a position that looks like you're, that you've got that natural arch.
Well, so talking about like the evolutionary brain, right? Like,
I mean, that's what a lot of
subconscious.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the research that I read, the useful part is what's attractive, right? So heels make people more attractive. They work. I think everyone knows that. Why? It seems to be because of postural changes rather than adding height, right? It's not that, 6-inch heels make you 6 inches taller and men just
Right.
love tall women, right? Well, 6 inches is a bit ridiculous, but it seems to be that there's a postural change, and then there's a additional question of why that would be attractive, and that's where it's like, I find it very interesting because I love the evolutionary sciences, but it doesn't actually change the kind of advice that comes from it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
whether the lower back arch is attractive due to a evolutionary history of lordosis or child carrying, it doesn't really matter.
Or better posture.
Yeah, or better. Yeah, it could be. I mean, that's not something that I've seen, but it could be better posture for athletic activities. For all I know. Yeah. Yeah.
So for women, are there certain like things about hair, long hair, short hair is perceived as more attractive, hair color? We have the cultural narratives of like blondes have more fun,
Yeah.
right? Like and blonde
Yep.
girls, quote unquote,
Yeah.
right? So I'm just wondering if there's any kind of studies on like hair.
No, let's talk about blondes.
Yeah.
No. But it actually is interesting because I think it's the folk wisdom here is that blondes are more attractive. The
Right.
actual research is a little more mixed. The behavior is not mixed. Women tend to want to lighten their hair, right? They tend to experiment, even if they don't go full blonde. A huge percentage of women, I think around 40% in the US in one study, have at some point experimented with hair lightening, right?
Yeah.
And this is more common than hair darkening.
Yeah.
And some scholars have made an argument that it's because, our hair naturally gets darker until it turns gray. And so lighter hair makes you look younger. Youth is generally to some
Positively
degree positively perceived and attractive to men, and to women to some extent as well. But again, the actual, all that storytelling is very interesting, but then the actual research on whether lighter hair is more attractive in women is quite mixed.
Right.
One interesting result, and this is a study that I've heard about, I haven't read it myself, so it might not be a good one, but there was one interesting result where blonde women got approached more. And this is very similar to tattoos in women. So generally, women with tattoos are not perceived as more attractive and sometimes perceived as less attractive, but they're generally approached more by men, right?
What?
It could be.
Wait a minute. So
yeah,
not perceived as attractive,
as
but
more attractive.
get approached more.
Yeah, and that could be true of blondes as well, is that there's an attention grabbing effect to the light blonde hair. So I would say that if you're a woman and you're considering lightening your hair, it may or may not suit you. It may or may not improve women's attractiveness on average, but it probably will get more attention from men. And this is something that, funnily enough, I've also heard anecdotally. So I've read, or I've heard of research on this, and I've also heard kind of anecdotal cases of like, oh my God, when I had blonde hair, I was always getting approached, and there might be something flashy there about the very light hair. Blonde men are generally not preferred, from what I've read. So
blonde men are generally not preferred.
Yeah. But I'm hoping that there's a frequency dependent thing where
it also depends on who you survey, right?
Yeah, the frequency of blonde men is lower than the frequency of women who prefer blonde men, and so maybe there's a benefit there, but I'm not sure.
Yeah,
because if your group is smaller than the group that you're competing for, you have an advantage. So like, for example, let's say like extreme muscularity in men is not preferred by women, right? But that's like the bodybuilding. Yeah. But maybe there are less very muscular men than there are women who
in comparison
prefer that, right? So they have a competitive advantage for that pool because there's a surplus of buyers versus sellers for the product of extreme muscularity. Yeah.
For the product of extreme masculinity.
Yeah, and that could be true of tattoos as well. That's something that I've said before, and it could also be true.
Do people find tattoos attractive?
I mean, there's not that much research on it, and the research on it, I would be interested in seeing a modern American sample.
Yeah.
But what I've read, no, it doesn't seem to help. Yeah,
really? Even though there's like a whole pool of women that are like, oh, I love tatted men.
Yeah, but then there's also a pool that doesn't like it.
That's true.
So it's like,
and also you can't go into onsen, hot bath places in Japan.
Yeah, so I'm restricted. Yeah.
Right, you can't go in.
Yeah,
tatted.
I think that there was one study that was quite a funny result where they asked gay men, straight women, and straight men whether men were more attractive with or without tattoos. And they did this in a very clever way. It wasn't like kind of a classic self-report, like just asking them either or. They actually had them rate digitally modified and very well digitally modified photos of men such that they sometimes had tattoos, sometimes didn't, and then they compared the ratings. And what they found was that gay men didn't find men more attractive with tattoos.
Okay.
Straight women also didn't find men more attractive or less attractive with tattoos.
Okay.
But straight men actually did. So there could be a failure of cross-sex mind reading here, where men, think, oh, if I get these tattoos, all the girls are going to think I'm super hot.
But it's all the other dudes are like, dude,
other dudes who are like, that's cool.
That's
and that's certainly been my experience. I mean, it's pretty rare that a woman will come up to me and be like, oh, I like your
Love
tattoos.
your tattoos.
But yeah, guys all the time.
Really? Look
Yeah.
at that.
Yeah.
Look at what men do for other men.
Yeah. Same
the
with the biceps. Yeah.
the tattoos.
Yeah.
Gosh,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Talking about men, I have to
Mm.
talk about safer sex because, I mean, we're both sex positive, and I think safer sex is more important. Well, I was going to say more important now than ever, but it's always been really important. I just hope that we're talking about it more and that using condoms can become way more normalized. I know that there is a narrative of like, oh, but it doesn't fit. Like, or if you have like a smaller penis, you might fear like that it's too loose. You like lose it because you've heard people say like, oh, I lost it in the vagina, it came off, or that like the tip of the condom is loose because the penis is on the smaller size. And then there's also people that are like, oh, my dick is too big, man, like no condoms fit me. Have you heard of that?
I've said it. No, I'm kidding.
Okay, well,
No, I'm kidding.
I am solving your problem then because MyONE condoms have custom condoms for you. It's just like getting custom suits to look dapper. Why wouldn't you want your dick to look dapper too? So MyONE condoms, you go on their website. I'll link the link in my episode description. You can download or order this fit kit. So you'll have a whole thing to measure your penis. You can measure the length and then you can measure the girth. Is this a fair girth? Yeah.
That's unfair.
So you can measure the length and the girth. It will give you like numbers and letters. You plug that into the website. You can order a sample. They have 52 sizes of condoms. So from very, very snug on a smaller side to very, very large. Literally fits every single man in the universe. Okay, so you can get the snug sampler, the large sampler, order one that is exactly your size, ships to your home, discreet. It's just lovely, isn't it? You get custom condoms to improve your confidence and also the confidence in enjoying sex, knowing that it's safe. We love it.
Very nice.
Love safer sex. Okay, so my next question is body hair attractive?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So again, I want to mention Barnaby. He's done the only study that I've read on this subject. And based on his literature review and then some other things that I was poking around looking at related to it, I would say that it varies cross-culturally, whether body hair is attractive. There's no like innate preference for hairlessness or her sweetness or anything, right? I would say that the one thing that we can be relatively sure of is that for most Westerners, very hairy men are not preferred, right? So it's possible that light amounts of body hair or no body hair is preferred in men. And then I think there was some old research indicating that low or no body hair was preferred in women as well. And again, I think here we can probably follow the behavior and figure out the preferences from there, in the sense that if body hair were attractive, it would be very peculiar that women spend so much time and so much money and so much effort to remove it. And if it were attractive in men, you wouldn't expect men to engage in all the trimming and sometimes shaving that they do, right? Men who are very hairy often, especially in a modern environment, relative to, our ancestors, men are much more likely
hair
to.
removal is $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
There's shaving, waxing, laser. There's just so many ways to remove hair. So when you say, like, I guess to understand this, we look at the behavior, it would make sense that
it would be very strange to find out that actually copious amounts of body hair were preferred and people were
right,
spending, as you say, you know, $1 billion a year or whatever collectively to remove it.
right.
But I think that, and again, I'm kind of speaking out of school here, but based on what I read, I would say that there's a little more flexibility with men, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where a light amount of body hair might also be good.
Mm-hmm.
But with women, there's less flexibility. And then, of course, there's also the stochasticity of just individual preferences. Some women
Right.
obviously very much like a lot of body hair, and some men probably do as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have never heard of a man that likes a lot of body
I know.
hair.
I was, even as I was saying that, like you could hear me in the sentence. I was like, there are definitely some women, because I could think of some. But then I was like,
But I'm sure there
but
is
there
someone.
certainly
There's
are.
always
There
someone for
certainly are.
everything.
And certainly across cultures, you're going to see some
Yes.
variation. It's only, I mean, we didn't have razors in the Pleistocene,
Right.
So it's it probably isn't an innate problem.
Right.
It's more just and I've heard that some social explanations. Again, the history here isn't my area, but I've heard that the fashion of, you know, shaving arms, shaving legs had something to do with getting into stockings, kind of the European
Right.
clothing item. And then there's also been some influence from the porn industry in recent
Right.
years, where the practice of removing hair around the genitals has become much more common.
Oh
Yeah.
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 For
Whereas before that
both
was
like
quite
women
strange.
and men.
Yeah, for women and
Yeah.
men. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I was even reading some research that suggests that a portion of men do it in order to enhance the appearance of the size,
Right.
because it's less background, I suppose.
Well, if you have a
Yeah.
lot of bush like
Yeah.
surrounding your penis will then physically look smaller.
Yeah, because some of it's hidden.
Yeah.
Right.
But when
That
there's
makes
no
sense.
hair,
Yeah.
then
But
it's
it's just
all
funny
exposed.
it's funny when you do a study and it's like, okay, why do you guys do this? And
So
you're
my dick look
expecting it.
bigger.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you're expecting like, oh, you know, it's just the trend,
Yeah.
or I think it's unclean.
Oh, I don't
or I don't
expect
want to get
any of those.
STDs. But instead it's like, I just wanted to look bigger. And it's like, all right, well, more power to you.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Okay. Last thing about the physical appearance. Let's talk about, you know, I guess it's a little bit of a difficult discussion to have, but weight.
Mm.
Right, because there's really no winning in talking about this. But
Yeah.
I've seen on the internet how like there was a meme or an influencer talking about, well, she's saying I prefer heavier men. Like I think she said I prefer fat men. And in my head it's like, okay, to me that doesn't make evolutionary sense, but at the same time I want to understand and have a discussion with like a social scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. This is so body weight and body size preferences. You kind of stumbled upon maybe my favorite topic. Like I really do find this very
Really?
interesting. Yeah. Men's body weight preferences and women's body weight modification behavior. One of the most interesting things in the mating and beautification literature.
Tell
So,
us more.
First, men's body weight preferences vary dramatically across cultures. There are cultures such as, you know, some parts of the South African Zulu where women's BMIs of up to 38, right?
Whoa.
Very heavy, right? That's close to close to morbid obesity from a technical perspective, which starts at about 40, and it's already, you know, very obese. Those body weights are preferred among those
And is there a
groups
reason
up to
for
that.
them?
Yeah, and I'll speak about that in a second because I want to paint the variation as well. In somewhere like urban Japan, on the contrary, or Korea, you might see body weights as low as like underweight, BMIs as low as 18, da 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 da. And look, BMI isn't a great metric for health.
Right.
And there's going to be variation as to how appropriate it is for one person, right? Like my BMI would technically be overweight on a BMI scale, but
What?
yeah, but I'm not. I'm genuinely just a little dense, right? That's just, but very slightly, right? And that's a quite a common experience. It's like the BMI says I'm overweight, but I'm actually healthy,
Yeah.
or the BMI says that I'm normal weight, but I can see that I'm actually quite unhealthy, right?
Right.
So it's not a great measure for health, but it is a great measure for size,
Mm.
right? It's a measurement of how big you are. It's
Right.
kilograms per meter squared. So it's a measure of how big you are. So men's preferences vary dramatically, and the variation seems to be partially explained by media and westernization, but it's also explicable by socioeconomic status, access to resources.
Oh.
There are some very funny studies which, you know, have replicated and have been done in different ways that show that men who are acutely hungrier prefer larger women. I'm serious. And there are also more cultural studies that show that men in different groups by socioeconomic status tend to vary in such a way that wealthier men and men in wealthier environments prefer women of lighter body weights, whereas men in poorer or relatively poorer men tend to prefer women of heavier body weights.
Interesting.
And so from an evolutionary perspective, you might wonder, why would this be the case? And there's also some other fun evidence for it. I mean, we could talk all day about this. There's some evidence that during times of economic scarcity, Playboy centerfold models get heavier in the States. And during times of economic abundance, they get lighter, right?
Wow.
Which is quite interesting. And then there's also some, if you've seen the Venus figurines, those Paleolithic carvings of very heavy women, right? Very heavy relative to, current standards.
Right.
This would be a realistic depiction of obesity.
Right.
Those women, carvings of those women, which some people think are, icons of beauty for that time, those become more common during, I believe it was periods of kind of glacial stress, where it's, I don't know how to phrase it, but periods where the environment, and we know this from from some kind of record, it's not my area of the science, but that environment was harsher, and so the men had a stronger preference for larger women. And the thought is that in a time of abundance, fat might signal negative things, right? Either from a status perspective or even just from a health perspective, right? But during times of scarcity, well, then fat is a signal of stored calories, right? So it's like if you're hungry acutely or you're socioeconomically stressed, it's like, I'm in resource deprivation. Who has resources? This lady who's larger.
Wow.
So we see variation there. And then on the other side, we also see variation in what women do. So in the UK or in the US or in Korea or Japan or any of these kind of, OECD wealthier nations, we generally see that women try to lose weight.
Right.
To improve their physical appearance.
Another $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
Weight loss.
Yeah. And I'm not sure how consistent that is cross-culturally, but certainly in America, the UK, Australia, these would be places.
People are obsessed with losing weight. Yeah.
But that's not a cultural universal, right? So there are some groups, such as among the Efik of southeastern Nigeria, where women actually try to gain weight in order to appear more attractive, or they're considered more attractive. So they'll, for months before marriage, they'll enter a fattening room where they restrict movement and increase calories in order to be heavier for the wedding. And then and it's considered very beautiful, right?
Wow.
So there's tremendous variation here. Yeah.
And here in America, like LA especially, people go into like strict diet, go to berries every day to lose weight for their wedding.
Do everything possible.
Yeah.
Go on Ozempic.
Yeah.
Get liposuction.
Yeah.
I mean, the weight loss and fat loss efforts of Westerners are extreme.
Right. But is there research that talks about, like, let's say Americans, like, is there a reason why everyone wants to be so skinny?
Well, it's a very wealthy country overall compared to.
So we have resources. We don't need to show it physically.
Then maybe there is some kind of within culture variation as well. I don't know if there's been a study on that. I know there was a study in Thailand where they compared it was within culture, and they compared low socioeconomic status, so poor and richer groups within that country. And they found that the poorer ones preferred heavier mates. I've also heard of some longitudinal studies that found the same result, or some longitudinal research that found the same result.
Wow,
but in
that's
America,
so
I'm not sure.
interesting.
Yeah.
So the correlation of like wealth and weight.
Well, this is, now you're getting into the kind of deep theoretical underpinning, which is the insurance hypothesis, which essentially posits that...
Insurance?
Yeah, which essentially posits that in an environment where food is scarce, food is a signal of abundance. In an environment where food is scarce, fat is a signal of abundance and capability. And in an environment where food is abundant, fat does not signal those things. And so it becomes less desired.
That's so interesting.
But I will say this as well, and this is actually something that we should just note. Women tend to overshoot men's preferences in terms of dieting and weight loss. So women tend to want to have less fat and want to have lower body weights than men prefer. So I'm not saying that Australian and American and British men don't prefer lighter women. They do. It's just that women in those countries tend to think
it's way skinnier
yeah,
than what it
exactly,
actually is.
exactly.
Yeah. And it's just women over women. Like it's just
yeah,
it's kind of like how men look at their biceps,
I
right?
know.
Women
It is
are like
similar.
who's losing more weight, who's
Yeah,
skinnier
yeah.
this summer,
And
right?
I don't know what the cause of that is, but it does just seem to, and we're actually designing a research program that might actually help us understand this. We'll see.
Body
Um,
dysmorphia.
yeah, it's peculiar because you'd think that women would have an accurate weight loss goals, but they tend to think men want thinner women.
Well, the
Then
media shows us really thin women.
could be the media for sure. It could be the media.
So, moving on from the physical realm, let's get into some of these really interesting points of like attractiveness. Voice.
Mm.
Tell us about voice and attractiveness. Is there such thing of like deeper voice for men, higher
Yeah.
voice for women?
Yeah, well, I've got a friend who's and soon to be co-author, hopefully, James Rudder, who's an expert on the vocal attractiveness literature. And what I've heard from him and what I've read as well is that it's quite clear that deeper voices are more attractive to women.
Mm-hmm.
It starts to tail off after you get too deep. It seems to be that if you get too deep, it's no longer attractive, and that the optimum depth is somewhere around 95 hertz, right?
Oh, I don't know what that sounds like.
That's about Obama levels of depth
okay.
is optimal.
That's
in terms
deep.
of it is deep. It's deep. But if you go like way deeper than that, I don't
Like
know,
Morgan Freeman?
like a Deontay Wilder or one of these guys has just crazy deep voice, it seems to be that it's less attractive. It's kind of
Right.
similar to height, right?
Right.
Women want very tall men,
Right.
but generally not
No,
super
if you're like
duper
6'7",
yeah, then
that
that's a
kind of-
disadvantage.
yeah.
Yeah, but it's a slight disadvantage. So it seems that very, very, very deep voices are not preferred, but very deep voices like Obama's are quite liked. Another, if people can't conjure up Obama, I believe Jason Momoa is also around there, right?
He
So
has
that's
a good
another
voice.
yeah, so that's another kind of close to optimum vocal depth. And so for men, it's quite clear that deeper voices are sexier. And
Do you
then
think this is something
interestingly,
they can adjust?
well, this is what's funny, is that men do this automatically. There's been some speed dating research where when men are talking to women that they're attracted to, they put on a deeper voice.
Oh my
Yeah.
God.
And there's
Hey,
there's
baby
still
girl.
yeah, exactly. There's a question as to, how much of this is actually effective
Yeah.
in terms of communicating that I have a
Yeah.
deeper voice, and how much of it is just letting the woman know subtly that they're being flirtatious, right? Because women, it's more complicated. So the stereotype is certainly that women with higher voices are more attractive, but the research on that is less consistent.
Like they're more feminine?
Yeah. I mean, our voices are our most dimorphic trait, right? Most, if you listen to chimpanzees or bonobos or our close relatives, they have very similar vocal pitches. It's actually quite unusual that humans have so much deeper voices in males compared to females. Like it's a really big sex difference. And it's kind of strange. It seems to be that the male side of it is more important in the sense that the research is more mixed on whether women with deep voices or high voices are preferred, deep relative to each other, high relative to each other. But it's pretty clear that men with deeper voices are preferred. And it's also pretty clear that men will try to deepen their voices in order to be attractive. It's an open question as to how effective that is.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I feel like, my girlfriends would talk about like, oh my God, and his voice is like so deep. Like his
And you
voice
would
is so
never
sexy.
hear his voice is so high and sexy.
Right. Like, oh my God, it's so pitchy and
Yeah,
sexy.
yeah. His whiny voice. I love it. Yeah.
Okay. Next up is scent.
Okay.
Is natural scent attractive? Why are people wearing so much cologne?
I mean, I think that cologne and perfume, these are products that work, and there's some research that indicates that they work. But natural scent is also attractive to some extent, and I think that that's patently true to anyone who's been in a romantic relationship, that some people smell really good naturally and some people don't. Now, what's more interesting is what undergirds variation in attractiveness. Why do some people? Because with looks, it's quite obvious. It's like,
Right.
oh, that person looks good. Why? And you can usually say, well, they have this feature, that feature. I quite like that. Da 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 da. Sometimes it's a little more obscure, but for the most part. But for smell, it's actually very difficult. It's like this person's sweat smells like sweat. This person's sweat smells like sweat, but I like this one and not this one, right?
Right.
So
And that indicates attraction for the person.
yeah. Some of that variation, I mean, there were the old sweaty t-shirt experiments where about kind of genetics, where it's kind of hard to know how effective those were. Some more recent research, there was a 2017 study that looked at dietary differences and concluded that people who eat more fruits and vegetables, which are very healthy, again, it goes back to the kind of signals of health thing, where people who eat more fruits and vegetables tend to have better smelling skin, better smelling sweat. So it's plausible that part of our scent detection for attraction is smelling a healthy diet, right? There's some research, and even some recent research, that indicates that women smell better when they're ovulating. They smell better to men. It's hard to know what to make of that. The effect is quite small.
I've heard that from my husband.
Okay, some anecdotal evidence. It makes sense conceptually because we have examples in other animals where the male animals are attentive to the scent of fertility, let's say the scent of ovulation. But in humans, ovulation is concealed, and so it's less clear whether we should even expect to see it. I mean, we don't have obvious cues to ovulation in our species. If we have them at all, they're very subtle. And this would count as a very subtle cue. So subtle that even if it is true and it does replicate, let's say over the next 10 years, we find out that, this is a real thing for sure. Women do smell better when they're ovulating. Even if it's true, based on past research, it would have to be a pretty small effect. So small that it's not like you could tell someone's ovulating by their scent. And I think that's pretty obvious to anyone. So that's really interesting, but I've been quite jaded by a lot of the ovulation research because the typical pattern is that we find out something really cool and then later it turns, because it's such a messy thing to study. It's very difficult to track when someone's ovulating and to have participants do that and to do it correctly and get a large enough sample size. Then there's all these different analysis options.
Scent is so subjective.
Yeah, and scent is also subjective. So it's a difficult thing to study, but it could be true.
Okay, now let's talk about intelligence.
Okay.
Are smart people more attractive?
In self-report studies, yeah, I mean, people say that they want an intelligent mate. In practice, people seem to mate quite assortatively, at least on things like education, and it's hard to know how much that's a proxy for intelligence. It certainly is to some degree.
Not always.
Not always, yeah, exactly. So hard to know. I think that a lot of people were very bullish on the idea that human intelligence is attractive. And some people even think that human intelligence is a sexually selected trait. And there's some evidence that, I mean, art, music, culture, this is what, Jeffrey Miller wrote about in the 90s. And I think that we've kind of largely accepted that there is a sexual selection story to be told there. But it doesn't seem that, and this isn't quite my area, so it's possible, I'm sure that there's some disagreement in the literature, but I personally haven't seen compelling evidence that
smart
high
people
relative to medium intelligence is, extremely attractive.
Right.
I don't know about that. Yeah.
It's probably
in self-report
it's
studies,
probably more about like confidence and ambition and the other things,
and
right?
also
like
similarity.
Working hard and
it's like if you're very smart, it's gonna be hard for you presumably to date someone who's very dumb and vice versa. So just practically, you won't get along as well.
I read a study that showed a man's level of education matters in dating, but a woman's doesn't.
Yeah, there's research in both directions. There's some research indicating that even it might even hurt, right?
Women who have high degrees actually found fewer mates.
Yeah, but there's also some research showing that education is there was a dating app study that I was looking at recently. It was a Dutch sample, and highly educated women were not preferred. They were actually discriminated against slightly by men.
That's so sad.
But then highly educated men also weren't preferred. But it wasn't that low educated men were preferred. It was just no effect.
Right. Well, hopefully they find each other.
Yeah, but there's some research indicating that educated men are preferred, and even if educated women aren't preferred overall, they do have a tremendous advantage in the sense that if you want to date an educated man, which many women do, and maybe even most women do, well, the best way to do that is to get educated yourself, because for the most part, educated men tend to date educated women. In fact, it's more common for women to date down in education than men.
Like your partner. You're both PhDs.
Yeah.
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 Highly educated man and woman.
Yeah, and part of this is pragmatic in the sense that I met my partner while we were in grad school together at Oxford.
And I think a lot of people do that. Like,
And I
I
think a
know
lot of
people
people
in
do
my
that.
cohort that found a partner in the PhD program.
Yeah, it's an awesome time to meet someone because, you're about the right age for it.
Yeah.
And you also have similar interests and loads of free time. And I mean, a lot of people, not a lot, but a couple people I heard they explicitly said like, look, I'm at Oxford Uni for my MRS, like I'm trying to find my partner here.
Not an MA, not an MS, MRS. For those of you that didn't get it, it's Mrs.
Yeah.
Okay. Does playing hard to get really work?
Not my area. I know that there's some research on it. I would say, based on what I've read, that being too, I don't want to say easy, but easy to get probably doesn't help in the sense that I
guess what easy to get, like, let's talk
that,
about that. Like, what does that mean?
If you're on a date with a guy and he says he loves you on the first date.
Oh, that's a red flag.
That would be a huge red flag. Yeah. And it's like, why would that be bad?
Okay, so that means
if he falls in love with me immediately, that's a really cartoonish example. But if he falls in love with me super easy, then he'd probably fall in love with anyone super easy. And so his love probably isn't that valuable as like a commodity, right? Let's say, like, it's like, this is something that I could lose easily as well, probably.
So when we say playing hard to get, we're not really saying that toxic, like, play hard to get. It's more about like being selective.
Yeah, and also I think that on the other end, it's like playing too hard to get, though. Like, people tend
Lose
to
your
like
back.
people tend to like people who like them.
Right.
To an extent.
Yeah.
And
no one wants to like work so hard for attention and affection.
Yeah. So there's probably a middle ground where it's like, if you're super keen super early, maybe best to
trying too hard.
maybe best to keep that under wraps at least at first, and I think people do that naturally. But also don't keep it so under wraps that you're too. I mean, it's hard to give general advice on this because it's more again, it's more of an art than a science in terms of
and also to be authentic, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's the thing.
You like
is that
them,
like
show it, but don't tell them you love them the first date.
There probably is an optimum strategy, but in my personal life, and maybe people are surprised by this because of all the science, I don't think about the science at all. I just,
you just vibe.
I just vibe.
Yeah, you and your girlfriend probably just vibe, got along.
Yeah, we got
interesting
along.
conversation.
Yeah, I met her and I was like, let's get coffee, and
let's get
that was
coffee.
it. And then we went on like 3 dates in 1 week.
Oh.
Yeah, it wasn't. So I guess maybe I came across as too keen. Maybe she came across. We were both very keen, and I wasn't.
And that's the best thing, is it like two people are clicking and wanting the same thing.
Yeah, and I wasn't thinking strategically. Like, that's the thing, is that like maybe playing hard to get does work, maybe it doesn't. But my advice is, if you're too game, oriented, then you miss out. Maybe you get more romantic partners or whatever, or a better romantic partner in some way, but it's like you miss out on the actual fun of romance.
Yeah.
By turning everything into it's also the extreme version of this, and this certainly isn't what you were asking, but like the very extreme where people are like doing tactics to like pick up. So
like
cringe.
pickup artists.
Yeah. So cringe.
No, so cringe.
Yeah.
So yesterday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Also
I have two more questions. Does having a certain job make you more attractive?
I knew that there was a study on this at some point that I'd heard about, where it was like some professions, even though they don't make much money, like firefighters, for example.
Well, they're hot.
Yeah, are considered hot. But I would say that for the most part, higher status, higher socioeconomic status, higher income, those jobs are generally going to be preferred by
because
women.
It's like available resources.
Yeah. And then on the men's side, I think that as a woman, women who are more educated tend to be more married, right? As well. I think that they also tend to marry more educated men. And that's kind of a loose proxy for the economics of the situation. So I would say that in terms of getting a partner, as a man, it certainly makes sense to try and, get a high status job. And as a woman, if you want to date a high status man, the best way to get around those guys is to get one of those jobs yourself. So, even if it's less important to men, like I know men don't seem to care. I mean, some studies show otherwise, right? There's some debate in the literature, let's say, But I would say for the most part, men seem to care less about the job title of the woman that they're interested in.
What about, this is my last question, and I think this is so like controversial, right? Money and attractiveness for men and women. So there's so much narrative in the world, in the dating world, like, oh, women are gold diggers, or like, men that don't make any money don't get any, chicks and whatnot. Like, what's going on here in terms of like research when it comes to money and attractiveness and mating and all that, for men, but also for women, like women that make a lot of money, women that don't make a lot of money.
Yeah, this is a complicated one. One finding is very simple, which is that money is, I mean, it's not in a saying women are gold diggers type of way, but it's just patently true, both in the research, but also just walking around the world, that women do find men with access to resources and with the potential to acquire more resources. Women do find those men more attractive. And it's no mystery why. I mean, that's a very helpful thing, right? Money is a very useful object, and so if someone has it, it makes sense that women would find that attractive. On the other end, there's been some modeling work from people in my lab that Candace Blake, Rob Brooks, that looked at women who make more money. If women want to date men who make more money than themselves, which many women do, and most women want to date someone who's at least around their ballpark, right? Well, then, quite counterintuitively, the more money you make, the less likely you are to fulfill that preference, right? So from a man's perspective, men are much more, it seems, more open to dating down economically, whereas women prefer to date across and up economically, it seems. And if that's true, well, then men get more options as they make more money, and women, because of the preferences, get less. However, I think that our preferences are likely flexible, and so it's just kind of a being realistic situation where it's like, if you're a woman making 30 grand a year, probably is realistic to be like, I want to date a man who's making more money than myself. But if you're making 200 grand a year, it might even be unrealistic to want to date a man who's around your income level. You'll probably have to date down, just if that's something that you want. I mean, not dating is also an option, and holding out and trying to find someone your level or above, that's fine as well. But I think that we all kind of need to. I think that men and women both need to be flexible with their preferences, especially given that, the economics underlying our preferences are changing.
What's your last advice for single people that are dating?
Get in a relationship, download Couply, our app.
Yes,
which I forgot to mention.
Yes.
So single people who want to get in a relationship. I mean, my advice is not going to be very scientific. Follow your heart, talk to people, try to actually make friends with people and connect with them. Listen more than you talk, so you can actually understand. This is like advice for my family, not.
But I'm sure there's all the science to back it up. Maybe it's not.
Well, I don't know that there is. I guess. And then also from a science perspective, try to look your best.
Try to look your best. Yeah. Where can everyone find you?
Just Google my name. A lot of stuff will come up. Yeah.
Macken Murphy, and also download Couply, so that you can have a better relationship.
And use my promo code, not hers.
That's right. Use his this time. Okay. Well, my loves, thank you so much for listening and watching till the end of the episode. Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, and share. And I'll love you forever and ever. Have an orgasmic day. Bye.
Thanks for listening. This was Luvbites. By Dr. Tara. Follow Dr. Tara on social media at lovebites.co. Have an orgasmic day.